A new government has been inaugurated, taking over from the old one on the 29th of May, 2023. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has basically hit the ground running by announcing some of his policies right from the grounds of the inauguration. One of the key policies has been making the rounds everywhere, which is the removal of petroleum subsidies. Indeed, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu did not announce the removal of petroleum subsidy at the grounds, but he merely reiterated the fact that no provision had been made in the budget for 2023 past 6 months for petroleum subsidy. What happened after was the many filling stations around the country started marking up their prices, sometimes to 300%. Later on, we would hear from the NNPC, Nigeria National Petroleum Company Limited, that there was no cause for alarm and that there was supply to last for at least a month. However, the day after, the same NNPC Limited announced new prices, raising all sorts of issues. Is it a regulator or an operator? Which institution should be announcing the new prices and what have you? And of course, we've gone through all of that, including threats by labor to go on a strike, the labor unions. However, just yesterday, the labor unions called off the strike, which has given relief to the country, an economy that's just trying to climb out of the doldrums. Not too long ago, we had COVID in 2020, lasting into 2021 and even part of 2022. Then later on, we had the cash exchange fiasco, which almost grounded the economy as well, right into the period of an election. Now that the fuel price has been amended to something about 150% higher, and the subsidy has been removed, what next should government be doing? Given that government has now got some breathing space, given the agreements they had with organized labor, they have some breathing space to do a little bit more for the people. Today, we have with us Madam Habu F. Dauda, the Moisoro of Fika, our good friend on this show, and he's going to be discussing some of these issues with us. Stay tuned. Welcome, Madam H.F. Dauda.
Thank you.
So you heard the background that I tried to lay. A lot has happened in the last few days. And what's your position on the subsidy has to go and has gone?
I join most Nigerians and say that it is one of those hardest pills that Nigerians must swallow.
Yeah.
But how do we, take that pill, and who is going to be in charge of the implementation of this removal is going to be very critical for Nigerians, because it has the potential to bring a lot of good on the backside, but a lot of suffering on the front side. So we have to manage the front side very well. And I think, from what we've had and some of the conversations for the last 3 days is that there is plan in place for some help. But that help needs to be immediate.
It needs to be immediate.
It needs to be immediate. It can't
but also the argument is there's no money to even help.
Absolutely. So because the reason why we're removing the subsidies is because there's no money. Exactly. So how do you bring money now to help?
So what do we do?
So you have to ignore the idea of giving away cash.
First and foremost.
First and foremost. You have to think of ways that can alleviate, the actual cost of doing business, actual cost of transport, actual cost of food and clothing. You have to think of ways to reduce that, bill for each household. And I think it will become manageable if we do that. And then allow the market now, with a new refinery online, maybe we will see some softening of the fuel price. But quickly we need to, change our own, expenses in terms of cost of, living, and bring that down for Nigerians. One of the key things, we've discussed about electricity in the past. This is the time to fix electricity. Because our businesses are depending on generators more than 50% of the time. So if that's where we are, going to head into, where cost of doing business is going to be so expensive, let us fix the electricity and then make sure that our businesses and our households have a stable power that they can now use to mitigate the cost of fuel.
But we've been trying to fix electricity a long time in this country. As a sector player, this is something we need to do immediately.
Yes.
How can we fix electricity with that much required speed?
I have high confidence that this government and the new president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, is going to bring in the right skills in place. He's going to bring in the right policies.
Are the skills in Nigeria, or they have to?
They're in Nigeria. They're in Nigeria. We have allowed politics and rent seekers to take over the sector. We shouldn't allow that. This is highly technical. Let's bring the people that can fix the system, and let's hold everybody accountable. It is very important. We remember the 16 billion during the Obasanjo days.
Yes.
Nobody was held accountable. I don't think Tinubu will allow $16 billion to just disappear.
Wow.
So these are part of the things that needs to happen. If we remove generators for each household, we remove them from businesses, our costs will come down.
Already the electricity generated by the private sector players, the discos, gencos and co, is already very expensive. Can they help the lowest of the low? Because they have this band A, band B, C and so on, and there are these people who are way down there who maybe are not entitled to more than 6 hours of electricity a day if they are lucky, because whatever is produced is given to the guys who can pay. And the guys, of course, those guys way down there are paying lower, but sometimes to expect no electricity.
I will probably get a lot of shouts back, but I will say this: that system is not working.
It's not working.
It's not working. Nobody is getting the targeted hours that they are paying in terms of the bands. If you're band A, you're supposed to get 20 to 22 hours per day. I don't think even in Abuja you can honestly say that there is a household that is getting that continuously and consistently. But the system is such that, somebody has to pay higher and somebody has to pay lower.
Indeed, we understand that.
So if that's the case, then let's make sure that it is applied, fairly. Not just, you create once, a scenario and then you just put it on the map and say, okay, let's use it.
Yeah.
That's not working. But let's make sure that those that are needs to pay higher are paying higher, and those that are at the bottom of the system should pay a little bit less.
Now let's move away from electricity, which is your forte. But if you had that $800 million, for example, there's this money they said we were borrowing from the World Bank. If you had the $800 million and you had to do some sort of incentive, look at that scenario. If you have $800 million. And you need to do some incentive for the people to assuage this fuel price removal, including the spiraling inflation that we're seeing in different places. What would you do? And if we did not have that $800 million, what can the government do still?
Well, if I have the $800 million, I have already said that we should not give out free money. So if I give out $800 million, I need to figure out a way for it to be paid back.
Yeah, okay.
So that's the first.
Okay.
So if it's a business or it's a household, it's a loan, long tenured, you can pay slowly. Pay 1,000, 2,000 a month, it doesn't matter. But you get ₦1 million, a business gets 5 million naira, you pay as long as it takes you, but you have to pay it back. But give that money to those businesses using the system that we have now. Everybody has a BBN, every business has a corporate affairs certificate. Let's hold people to account, but give them the money today. Let them solve the issue of sudden, sudden lack of, funding to buy fuel, buy food. It will give them time now to adjust their budgets so that now they can also. It also give businesses time to increase their production so that they will make more money. But make it as a revolving, loan, and then send it out. Don't just give people 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 and walk away, because it's not going to help.
We've done that so many times in the past.
But if you make it meaningful, $1 million or $2 million is meaningful in any household, and if you make it meaningful to a business, 5 or 10 million is substantial. Then you can change the scenario for all of us. You know, we will not be so poor that we can't even go out our own households. And I think that's what the government needs to do. Secondly, you have to look at, okay, if I am able to use that money in those areas, now what do I do as a government to now bring up the income of every citizen of Nigeria? So now they talked about, you know, raising the minimum wage, but don't do it just for civil servants.
Exactly, but usually the government will make a pronouncement for generally, but they know they can fund it. Oh, mind you, federal government can fund usually they will be able to fund the minimum wage.
Yes.
When they make pronouncement, 1 month or 2 months, the federal government will start. Then the states will start a food drag. Okay.
Exactly.
And even as we speak, there are states that are not paying.
Have not paid the last one. Yes.
And so, I mean, I just read somewhere that TUC, Trade Union Congress, is asking for 200,000 minimum wage. You know, so I think we're getting to the level where they are in Uganda. One day I got into Uganda, I exchanged $400, and it was 1 million Ugandan shillings. I said, wow, this is how people become millionaires. If you change for $4,000, probably we have 1 billion of their currency. I think we need to be careful in that respect.
We have to be it has to be reasonable. If you're making 40,000 now, how much do you need really on top of your to cushion this?
Yes.
To cushion this
I think also we need to look at, for example, the former statistician general, Yemi Kale, I saw where he said somewhere that he expects the inflation to get up to 30% this month, from 22.2% last month. So if we're talking about 30%, now there's a problem because somebody somewhere said on the day that they removed the subsidy, I mean that statement was made, the day after, the watermelon he buys for 800. The person selling said it was now 2,000.
Yes.
And we said, why? He said, well, but you know, they just increased fuel price. And the exact amount of increase was translated to
all items.
Yes. Well, as if watermelon itself was a petroleum product.
Thank you.
But before you answer that, we'll go on a short break and come back quickly.
Okay.
Welcome back, viewers, and we're still on the big issue of the fuel subsidy removal and what next in terms of palliatives, or what can the government do, the new government of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, to assuage the sufferings of the most vulnerable amongst us. That's what we've been discussing, and still with us is HF Dauda Moisoro. So, before we went on the break, we were looking at options. We looked at, okay, what can the scenario be if we had this money that we are supposed to have borrowed from IMF, noting the fact, though, that, a lot of Nigerians believe we have borrowed. I don't think so from an economic point of view. But we're scared of taking all these monies that seem to disappear.
True.
And we can't trace where exactly the monies went. Otherwise, we're still under leveraged as countries go. Anyway, but that's a discussion for another day. So we looked at that scenario. We need to look at the scenario where, in the event that there's no money anywhere, for example, but minding the fact that government is saving some money, at least between 4 to 8 trillion, which used to disappear in NNPC by way of subsidy. The government will now begin to get it in trickles and later in deluge. What do you think the government could try to do? Because again, I think from the feelers I have, a lot of people are not finding it easy.
No.
And, the critical thing is that even apart from the price of fuel, the pass-through effect to inflation is also quite growing. Substantial.
I mean, we're talking about it's approaching 30%. So, of course, inflation is a concern. What I was thinking along the line of what the government can do is actually try to look at how they can cut cost of living for Nigerians. Transportation is one aspect that is a quick, sensitive to fuel, and we have other ways of reducing the cost of transport. Our rail system is there. We have not really developed it since in the late 50s. It's time now to look at how do we leverage the rail system to take away a lot of the heavy loads from our roads. The roads network itself has to be fixed and maybe also rebuilt in some places, and some new roads needs to be built so that the cost of transporting these goods will come down quickly, and that will now reduce the cost of goods to all Nigerians, which is what we are paying. You go to the market today, what they tell you, something you paid 800 naira, you're now looking at it for 2,000. The reason they're saying that is because of fuel. So if we can change the outlook of transport, the cost, then the food items and others will definitely come down. The other thing is for the government to look at how do we now reduce the actual cost of fuel itself, not by subsidizing, but by the actions they take. We are buying the fuel in Naira, and we have our foreign exchange is now going out, so we can invest that money in areas that will now reduce the cost of all this fuel. At the other end of it is that we need to look at, okay, if we have communities that need help in terms of, infrastructure, this is the time now for the government to now develop those infrastructure and say, okay, you need this and we have the money from this 800 million. Let's use it now to mitigate that problem. Reduce all those areas, and then the last and final leg, in my view, is also communication. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of things that we don't need to go to to get it done. But if our communication system is not so strong, then you have to, every day you want something, you have to go out. When there are things you can do from home, there are things you can do from your office, there are things you can do from your market, from your shop. Those things need to be out there and available. So our network in terms of communication also has to be built and stabilize and become reliable. So those are the areas that if the government just put programs in place, it will now look like we now have a plan for actually ignoring the cost of fuel because we have other alternatives.
How do you think we can, as you were speaking in my head, I was thinking about increasing productivity among our people. Like they say, give me a fish or teach me how to fish, So when you were speaking about telecommunication, power, how to make things easier for the people, in my head I was also thinking, okay, perhaps we should direct this palliatives or whatever they are towards boosting people's productivity. People have dignity. Yes, they want to work. They want to produce, in most of our cultures, they want to produce something. They want to earn on their own. They don't really necessarily want to wait for government to come and feed them. Exactly. So how can we direct such spending towards maybe boosting the local businesses they do, whether it's agriculture, whether it's adding value to the agriculture, in a way that we're not just pumping money, but as we're saying, spending that money,
it's also growing our own.
Helping them to grow.
I think we have focused a lot on foreign investment.
Yeah, exactly.
So why not now look at Nigerian investment?
Exactly.
Because, our banks are there, but they are only collecting deposits.
It's unfortunate.
So let our banks now begin to support businesses. Don't worry about how much money is coming in. Worry about how much people are using it, because that is the only way everyone will get something to do. If I have a small business and I have a bank that will trust me with 10 or 20 million, I can do a lot. But if the banks don't see anybody as credit worthy, then there is no way that will change. The president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has said that we need a credit system that is, functional. The way to do it is from the earlier conversation we did. When he starts giving out loans that must be paid, then that develops that credit system. We know if you are the person that will pay back or you will not pay back. And the banks now can use that information now to begin giving out loans to businesses, to other, entities and enterprises that can now build jobs around Nigeria. As long as money is hidden in one place, there is no way our people will have something to do. So it has to be distributed out. Yes, the interest rate is a little bit too much for many, but eventually it will come down. So those are things that policies that government has to look at today and start thinking about what do we do in terms of credit, in terms of banking, in terms of how we can mitigate.
Whatever incentives they're trying to give should also look at that, because as you spoke, I understand that countries like the USA, the US has about 14,000 banks.
Exactly.
They're trying to, there's a history I read about it. Of course, there was a time when there were restrictions from state to state.
How much?
They really restricted banks. You can't open in more than one county. You can't have more than one branch. So there was a metastasis. Of course, the savings and loans crisis came. Some of them went.
They all failed.
Even as we speak about 14,000. Equally the same thing in Japan. Equally in places like Germany. The presence of many banks. I used to think that they were a nuisance. But of course, in Nigeria, they could be, because unfortunately, they don't do what they're supposed to do. For some reason, we've not been able to hold our banks to do what they are meant to do. So it's a case of a microfinance bank comes up, and the MD of the bank and his EDs, they want to live as if they're in Lagos and drive big cars and so on, when that's not their focus. So, but we cannot also remove from the fact that, look, if we're able to focus our banks are very important. Like in the rural areas now, nobody is lending anything to them.
No.
Zero.
No,
they can't even be bold enough to walk into some snazzy, branch of some bank maybe in the state capital. In the recent cash swap problem that we had, that was when we realized that, about 400 out of 774 local governments in Nigeria have no banks.
And if
so we need to issue more banking licenses. Do you agree with that?
Yes, of course. Two, I'll come to that, quantity and amount of banks in. But let me say this. When you are credit worthy, if there is a jump in certain goods prices or whatever, all you need to do is say, okay, I can't afford it today, but I can take from the bank, and then I'll pay over time. And that will sort of blunt the feeling of how much pain you're going to go through. So for credit worthiness, it's actually a system that reduces the headaches of fluctuation, because it evens out the playing field. Whether there is high price or low price, you can still afford it. You just pay over time. So now, in the other end of the banking way, you said we have fewer in Nigeria than most countries. The reason why we have fewer, in my view, as a layman, I'm not a banker, but I will say this, is because our banks are cash-based.
Yeah.
If there is no cash in the bank, there is no point of having the bank. But in the other countries that we speak of, they don't need physical money in the vaults. So they can open as many branches as they need, because the transactions are now become electronic. So if we can do that to our own banking system, where our transactions are becoming electronic, then we can open branches in the rural area, and someone who is looking for 500,000 or 100,000 can walk in and still do a loan transaction without cash. Because the issue of our banking with cash is that we think about security. Yeah. But when you don't have a cash-based bank system, then they can open anywhere. And that will give us, so I remember that, in his, planning and in some of his conversations, the president has said that there has to be a good and solid credit system.
Yeah.
I hope we can do that. I know there are issues around interest. Some of our smartest people can figure it out, and then we can, find. But people need to have money, even if they don't have it in their pocket. They need to be able to use it, because they can work for it.
Yeah, being a techie person, I was recently in Kenya, and I realized I found the joy of M-Pesa.
Okay.
And, it was a case of you could go to the bank. Go to you don't have to go to the bank. You go to the telephone company, Safaricom, and you get a number, and you tell them, I want to be on M-Pesa. They kind of just download the app for you. And then you can actually load money on it. If you have cash you can put on it, you can go to your bank and transfer to it. And everybody uses that M-Pesa, especially the poorest people. There are beggars standing at the mall.
And they're using
every
it.
country have
Yes.
beggars. And then they will say, listen, if you say you don't have cars, say, well, I'm taking Pesa.
Yeah.
The drivers of the taxis, the little taxis, everybody uses the Pesa. And I was wondering how come we've not been able to develop this in Nigeria. What's the case of all the MTN Momos and co?
It didn't work.
What's happening in Nigeria?
Because
Are you sure some myopic individuals are not suppressing this? Because he has, in fact, and I went and researched, I found out that this M-Pesa, give or take, has taken out about 2 to 3 million people out of poverty in Kenya.
Yes, and it is normally the fight between the provider and the small time distributor, if you want to call it, because they don't agree. Someone thinks this guy is making too much money, or someone thinks this guy is making too much money, and so the system fails. In the US, when credit system became abundantly to everybody, it came to a point where if you don't even have credit, you can go and put your own money behind the card, and you can start using it as if you do, and then they will monitor your usage, and over time you become credit worthy, and then they will give you what you needed. In Nigeria, we haven't even started. So really, for a lot of the systems like M-Pesa, is something that someone has to be comfortable enough to make just a little bit of money.
Exactly.
Just a little bit of money.
I think that's the problem we have here.
We don't want to make just a little. Yes. If you make just a little bit of money, everybody can have something to use.
Yes, that was what I realized.
Yes.
People have to have a certain level of contentment.
Exactly.
I ran into one Nigerian young man in Rwanda recently who said he went into Rwanda with maybe $50 or so. And he went with all the aggression. Now, he managed to make some money, it's a bit comfortable, but he said, for once he realized that the way we run around chasing money in Nigeria is not the way people do it.
No.
That many people, once you can cover the basics, and I realized there's value in being able to cover the basics. Unlike here, we have people doing rituals to try to get money, all sorts of things. People get into government, they pack all the money and all of the. Where are we running to?
Well, our cash-based. If you want to buy a house in Abuja today, just the thought of it will tell you that you have to almost run 100 per minute or something, because there is no way you can make that money to buy a house. There's no way.
Exactly.
So how do we buy a house?
Last word from you, under 2 seconds or 3. What are your projections for the Tinubu government? What are you
We have extremely high confidence. I have, I have participated on the sidelines strongly, and we also know that from the plans that he has put forth, that there is a remarkable difference between him and all the previous governments.
I think so. I think he has reached the ground running.
Yeah, he did. And the idea that, some of it is good to start with the painful.
Sometimes.
Yes, it's good to start with the painful.
Much.
So he has started with the painful. We think that, we will turn the corner, and then things will begin to look good for Nigeria. Thank you, sir.
It's been great talking to you. Thanks for obliging us in spite of all the hiccups and
Thank you very much. I'm very glad.
Thank you very much, viewers. You've been watching your program, and it's been a great one today. Join us next time.